Barry Norman for the first in a new series of Film 80.
Good evening, and how nice to be back. Well, I can't speak for you, of course, but it's certainly nice for me. And come to that, it must be quite nice for John Travolta to be back with a film that, by and large, people seem to like. The last time we saw him, he was not waving, but drowning in a dreadful thing called Moment by Moment, which seemed to drag on hour by hour and day by day. And there was a strong temptation to wave back and shout, "Goodbye, John." But now he's returned to somewhere near his former eminence in Urban Cowboy, and I'll be discussing that in a minute. What's more, I'll be talking to Travolta himself. Meanwhile, his old sparring partner from Greece, the movie that is, not the country, Olivia Newton-John, is also around in a new musical called Xanadu, and we'll be taking a look at that as well. Furthermore, we have Al Pacino as an undercover cop trying to catch a homosexual killer in Cruising, Alan Arkin in a comedy called Simon, and returning to the musical theme of this week's programme, there's Alan Parker's Fame, which follows the varying fortunes of a group of New York kids at a theatrical school. Oh, and I mustn't forget the competition, which also has a musical theme. Well, let's begin with Urban Cowboy, which wisely, I think, returns John Travolta to the kind of athletic musical ambience in which he thrives best. Moving, he's a star; static, he ain't. Well, now, in Urban Cowboy, he plays a rather simple-minded construction worker at a petrochemical plant in Texas, and like his equally simple-minded colleagues, he gets his kicks and his relief from the monotony of construction work by repairing every night to Gillies, the biggest honky-tonk bar in the world, there to drink vast quantities of beer, dance a bit, and dream of being a real cowboy by riding a mechanical bull. But also at Gillies, he encounters Deborah Winger, a sort of small slut about town, and after knocking her around a bit, he marries her and they settle down to live somewhat squalidly ever after in a mobile home. Squalidly, but not always happily, as we're about to see when they take on new partners at Gillies.
Stand by me. Won't you stand by me? If you're in need, won't you stand by me?
So when are you going to take me home and rape me?
Whenever you get ready.
I'm ready right now. Come on.
Darling, stand.
I gotta tell my girlfriends I'm going. Got myself a cowboy. See y'all later. Bud! 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 Bud, where are you going?
Darling, stand.
Oh, you bitch!
Well, that's one way of attracting a man's attention. The plot of Urban Cowboy climaxes with the great mechanical bull riding competition which pits Travolta against Scott Glenn as an ex-convict and real rodeo rider who's stolen Miss Winger away from our hero, the cad. But what the film basically does is to examine a bizarre substratum of American urban life wherein both the men and the women seem to yearn for the simpler, more physical and more violent traditions of the Old West. At Gillies, boozing and fighting and thumping women, sometimes so hard that their Stetsons fall off, are the popular pastimes. And of course there's the love story, in which Travolta, nobly overlooking his own transgression in shacking up with another girl, sulkily blames Miss Winger for her apparent betrayal before he's shown the light by his dear old Uncle Bob, who says, sometimes even a cowboy's got to swallow his pride to hold on to something he loves. Having delivered himself of this gem, dear old Uncle Bob is promptly smitten by lightning and dies, which strikes me as an example of divine overreaction. After all, as a philosopher, Uncle Bob might not be in Plato's class, but he doesn't really deserve to be burnt to a crisp. However, the film, I must warn you, is far too long and the storyline is far too slender, but the country and western musical sequences are splendidly staged, the atmosphere of Gillies is weirdly fascinating, Deborah Winger is a definite find, Scott Glenn exudes menace, and Travolta battling staunchly against weak dialogue and characterization that presents him as both petulant and slightly brutish shows encouraging signs of being able to act. Interestingly, he's a great deal more butch and macho in Urban Cowboy than in any of his earlier films. He gets drunk and misses church and goes to bed with 2 girls at the same time. He gets involved in fistfights, not only with Miss Winger, though also with Miss Winger, and briefly he sports a beard for reasons which will be explained later. There were moments, I may tell you, when he gave me the strong impression of a dancing Clint Eastwood. So let's have a look at some rough, tough action on the mechanical bull.
That makes you happy? Don't ride it again, please. Please don't ride it. You're going to hurt yourself.
Smack
Calm
it.
down.
Take it easy. Bull's too fast. Easy. Don't let this shit go too far.
What made you decide on Urban Cowboy for what I suppose in effect was a kind of comeback, wasn't it?
If you'd like to call it that, fine. Yes. Let's see. What made me decide? I think every actor likes to play a cowboy at one point in their career. This seemed a marvelous way to do it because of the, it seemed in a new vein to play a contemporary cowboy in a new setting.
It seems to be very much a male chauvinist pig world there. Do you go along with that kind of thinking?
Well, I don't personally go along with that way of feeling, thinking, but I think that is the way it is. But that doesn't necessarily reflect my personal tastes in doing things.
What about that beard that you wore briefly at the beginning of the film? Did you grow it and wear it deliberately to distance yourself from the John Travolta of the previous films?
No, honestly, I had the beard in the beginning of the film because of laziness, first of all. I mean, before the film. And then when we went down to the club, we saw that a lot of the young people had the beards. And I said, it may be interesting for the first part of the first 5-10 minutes of the film to have him have this beard, since I had it already. If I hadn't had it, I wouldn't have bothered.
You know, I'd heard you actually wore it or grew it to start with because you'd been bitten by your dog.
Yes, I did. Right over here, there's a scar. And
Very ungrateful dog.
Yes, well, it was a pup, not a big puppy, but it was, I sort of startled it, I guess, by, it was lying on the kitchen floor in a typical manner. And I went down to sort of cuddle with it, and it was surprised and got me.
You still got the dog?
No.
Nor the beard?
No, it was an English setter, as a matter of fact.
Oh, you can't. Now, what about that mechanical bull riding? Did you use a stuntman for those sequences, or can you actually ride the thing yourself?
No, I'm pretty good at the bull.
Really?
Yes.
How come?
Well, because I trained about a month to maybe a month and a half, and really learned how to do it right, slowly and surely. And it's quite a brutal thing at first. From your knees to your crotch, you tend to get quite beaten up there. But after about the first week, you toughen up the legs, and it tends to get easier. Matter of fact, what's interesting is in the United States right now, because of the film, in California alone, there are 1,100 country western clubs, disco-turned country western clubs, that have come up and put the bulls in their nightclubs, and the people are dressing with the hats and the gear and riding the bulls and doing the same thing as I did in the movie, which I'm actually quite proud of.
Well, going back a bit to what I said right at the beginning, that in a sense you were making a comeback at the age of 26, Moment by Moment was something of a disaster. How did you feel about that? How did you react to it?
Well, I thought it was overreacted. I mean, the idea to call it a disaster, I mean, how can a film really be a disaster? I mean, I mean, it's only a film, really, and I thought it was at least a respectable try at something, and I thought it was really a media reaction more than a public reaction because not enough people saw it.
But it was said at the time that you'd lost confidence, and that was why you'd backed out of making The American Gigolo. Was that true? Had you really lost confidence?
Well, no, because shortly after that I did Urban Cowboy, so I couldn't call it a lack of confidence. My mother had passed away, and I wasn't in the mood for doing a movie, really, and I needed a few months off because I hadn't had a break in a long time.
Well, you suddenly acquired the reputation of being a recluse, but maybe that was because you wouldn't give press interviews.
I think that is exactly it. Because I was far from a recluse. I always had people around me, family and friends, and you know, that again seemed a good thing to say, to create newsworthy type of things.
But what effect does all this have on a young man who just suddenly comes out of nowhere? I mean, girls screamed when they saw you, they fainted at your feet, they wanted to tear your clothes off you. I mean, it must have some effect on you.
Well, I tend not to look at it as a negative. I mean, actually, it's quite nice. I mean, I wouldn't put myself in that position every day because of the physical abuse that you could have, but I take it as a compliment. There's enough press out there to deflate your ego every once in a while.
Well, looking back then over your career, the huge success of Saturday Night Fever and Grease, far less of a success, shall we say, with Moment by Moment, now Urban Cowboy. How have you emerged from all this? Are you more cynical, wiser?
I think I'm stronger, just personally, from whatever I've gone through for the last 3 years. And I think cynicism, I don't think I've become cynical, but I think I'm aware of the cynicism around me, and I'll give it less trust.
Because you've got a long time to go, haven't you? I mean, you're only 26. You've got a long career ahead of you. What kind of an actor do you see yourself as?
Kind of actor I've always been, you know, a serious actor who likes to act.
Bud, will you just take off your shirt?
Just get away from me. I don't need your help, and I don't want your help. Don't you showing off on that goddamn bull no more, neither.
I wasn't showing
What the
off.
hell do you call it if you don't call it showing off? Huh?
I call it riding it.
Oh, just riding it, huh?
That's right, riding it. I'm gonna ride it again and again as much as I want to.
No, you're not. You think you are, but you ain't.
You know my daddy. You can't tell me what to do.
Well, look, I'm the next best thing to your daddy. I'm your husband. I say you ain't never riding it, ever.
I think you're just jealous because I can ride it better than you.
I'm what?
Bud, you hit me! Will you out? Cut it out! Stop it!
Come on. Get out.
Where am I supposed to go?
Go see your daddy. You like him better.
You know, the question that everybody asks me is, what's he really like? Well, he's like you saw him there in the interview, polite and rather guarded. It was an odd encounter we had, largely, I gather, because of a double misunderstanding. He thought I didn't like him, and I thought he didn't like me. Absurd, of course, because I'm essentially lovable, and no doubt Mr. Travolta is too. Anyway, Urban Cowboy is now showing at selected cinemas. And now let's move on to Simon, which stars Alan Arkin and was written and directed by Marshall Brickman, hitherto better known as Woody Allen's scriptwriting partner. Simon, Brickman's first effort as a director, is set in a think tank in which the best brains in America have been brought together to solve the world's problems under the leadership of Austin Pendleton. What they actually do, because they're also the craziest brains in America, is devise complicated ways of, for example, falsifying the TV ratings so that the Osmonds are credited with an audience of millions, when in fact only 12 people in the entire country were watching them. Alan Arkin, as a failed psychology professor, becomes involved with this mob when the assorted geniuses decide to foist a supposed extraterrestrial being on the United States to see what sort of panic might ensue. Arkin's therefore brainwashed into believing his mother was a spaceship and is then wrongly accused by the military of being responsible for the release of an IQ-reducing gas that turns the eggheads into giggling infants, and the rest is chaos. It's a nice idea, but somehow neither scriptwriter Brickman nor director Brickman gets anything like the best out of it. And too often the film resorts desperately to Jewish jokes and media jokes and easy satirical attacks on the military and the ubiquity of Muzak. Madeline Kahn is among those involved in the plot to brainwash Arkin, and Judy Graubart is the girl with whom he escapes from the think tank and hides out among a religious community that worships TV and intones commercial jingles like prayers. Generally speaking, Simon is moderately funny at times, but mostly disappointing. Here's Arkin expounding his views at a press conference.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've been doing a great deal of thinking about who I am and why I've been sent here to live among you. And the answer is really very simple. Things here are just not working out very well. Your jobs are boring, your food is bland, your water is polluted, and your relationships don't work. Is that not right? And the question is, how have things come to such a sorry state of affairs? I will tell you. There is too much bad stuff around. Bad food, bad drink, bad art, bad ideas. Everything's all clogged up. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of all the bad stuff, and that will be a very good beginning. Now, I have your list of things which I'd like written into the Constitution immediately, after which I promise you your lives will be less tense and more rewarding. 1, all music in elevators, airports, restaurants, and other public rooms will cease immediately. 2, no more children or animals may be used to sell products. 3, lawyers who lose cases will go to jail with their clients. 4, no doctor may write a diet book. Any doctor who does will immediately lose his license and become a dentist. 5, I think we don't really need a House of Representatives and a Senate. The Romans didn't have one, so let's just have a Senate, okay? Which reminds me, I think it would be a very good idea from now on all politicians who appeared in public wear a cone-shaped party hat. Not bad, huh? 6, pollution. Anybody who owns a factory that makes radioactive waste has to take it home at night with him to his house. 7, anybody who says, I'm trying to get centered, you are invading my space, or far out, will be fined $50. Make that $100.
Simon is now on in London, and so too is Cruising, wherein Al Pacino plays a cop who, posing as a homosexual, is instructed to infiltrate the heavy leather section of New York's gay community to unmask a particularly unpleasant killer. Homosexuals in both New York and London have protested indignantly about the unattractive picture it presents of the gay world, in which we're led to believe sex is the only important thing in life, and seductions take place mournfully to the loud creaking of leather trousers. Well, I can sympathise with the protesters, but leaving them aside for the moment, Cruising is a pretty dire film generally, the kind that's likely to give sadomasochism a bad name, let alone homosexuality. Largely because of heavy cuts by the censor, it's an extremely glum picture and also very ambivalent. In the first place, you're never quite sure whether the real killer has been caught, and in the second place, and this, I think, is what most upset the gay community, you're virtually given to believe that homosexuality is a sort of contagious disease. Nance, says Mr. Pacino at one stage, and I must stress that he's talking to his girlfriend, Nance, what I'm doing is affecting me, and so indeed it is. Just from the way he puts on his eyeshadow, you can see he's not the same cop he was when he started out. But are we to assume that he always had latent homosexual tendencies, or has he been corrupted by the nature of his undercover job? William Friedkin, the writer and director, provides no answer, and I really think he should have done. You can't just leave potentially disturbing questions like that hanging around unsolved. However, here's Mr. Pacino in his kinky gear on the track of the killer.
Where you going, friend? What do you mean? Got a knife, gun, anything at all? Why? What's wrong? You police officer. What? This is Precinct 9. You got the wrong attitude. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Right.
Looking for something? That bulge in your pants ain't a knife. Why don't we take a walk? Not tonight.
Well, at this stage, let's have a look at a few items of news, and first I should like to pay my own tribute to my friend Jackie Gillett, who died so tragically at the weekend. She was a lovely and talented lady for whom I had great affection and admiration, and it's appropriate that I should mention her here because she was the very first person to present this programme almost exactly 9 years ago when it was called Film 71 and was shown only in London and the South East. And I may say she set an extremely high standard for those of us who followed her. Well, the American Screen Actors strike is now into its third month. All production has stopped in the major studios, while 60,000 actors argue in particular about what share, if any, they're going to get from the manufacture and sale of movies on video cassettes. If they don't solve this problem soon, the Academy Awards for 1982 are going to be interesting, with no films at all to choose from. I suppose the nominations will be for Best Performance by Leading Pickett and the like. As a matter of interest, the last Hollywood strike took place 20 years ago and was led by that notoriously fiery left-wing radical Ronald Reagan. Whatever did happen to Ronald Reagan? On a more cheerful note, I must record the opening of a pub in Acton, London, called the Hollywood Greats. Whether the name was inspired by a splendid BBC TV series of that title, presented by somebody whom I admire greatly, I really couldn't say, but the notion behind it all is rather a good one. Apart from dispensing booze, this pub will also be showing current movies on video cassettes, which I suppose also helps one understand why the Hollywood actors are a bit worried. I mean, why shouldn't they get a slice of that kind of action? An independent observer tells me that the cinema section seats about 100 people and that waitresses in slinky nightclub outfits serve food and drinks while the films are on, which may not be altogether a sound idea if discussions between waitresses and customers are going to get all mixed up with the dialogue. After all, you wouldn't want to come out from seeing, for instance, Citizen Kane in the firm but erroneous belief that Rosebud was a scotch on the rocks with a dash of soda accompanied by a cheese and cucumber sandwich. Still, on the whole, it's rather a bright notion, and the first film to be shown there is Airplane, which is the funniest comedy of the year so far. Basically, it's a series of quick one-line gags strung together to send up the Airport film series. This is a fairly typical joke, and I'll leave you to decide who this fellow reminds you of. Well, elsewhere in the cinema, one of the most interesting developments is the new special edition of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You may have seen the original, or what I suppose we must now call the rough cut, a couple of years ago, and you may have felt as I did that the start and the end were fine, but the middle was a fair old bit of rubbish. Well, Steven Spielberg, the director, has lately re-edited it, removed 25 minutes of the old stuff and replaced them with 20 minutes of new material and hitherto unseen outtakes. This version is now on in London and should be on general release by the end of next month. But returning to the really new movies, those that haven't yet been taken back for structural alterations, we have Olivia Newton-John's latest, a musical called Xanadu. In this, Miss Newton-John bursts into life from a wall poster and immediately heads for Hollywood. Thereafter, she reveals an unnerving habit of suddenly disappearing from place A and instantaneously turning up in place B, wearing roller skates and giggling. Michael Beck finds this quite enchanting, but then he's a disappointed young artist who doesn't expect a hell of a lot from life anyway. Also involved is Gene Kelly, and I think I'll let him tell you roughly what the film's about.
The thing that attracted me to Xanadu was the story, the fact that the young people weren't doing another realistic kind of thing. They were doing a fantasy, and yet they were doing it in the style of what we like to call the new music, because that embraces rock and roll, disco, whatever terminologies you want to give it. And in doing this kind of thing and doing it with the new music, as opposed to the music that I was raised on, Gershwin, Porter, Berlin, and so forth, is what I think is a real step ahead for these young people, and I admire them very much for making it. Strangely enough, I don't have that much to do musically in the picture because I'm playing the role of a man who's retired, and when he was young, he wanted to be a musician. He got out of music, went in the construction business, made a tremendous amount of money, retired to Southern California, and misses it. And when he runs into this young man, played by Michael Beck, whom we call Sonny in the picture, he meets him on the beach, and then he meets him in a shopping mall. They get talking, and they seem to have mutual aesthetic and artistic interests. So we become embroiled, and I help him with his love affair, which is, you know whom, Olivia Newton-John. Yes.
Kira, I love you.
I love you, Sonny.
What's the matter?
All of it. Everything. We can't go on pretending this is for real.
I know it is hard to believe.
Oh, I can't have these kind of feelings. It's beginning to hurt. Oh, this part of it was never supposed to happen.
I don't understand. What do you mean, hurt?
I know I shouldn't, but I do, and it's crazy. Sonny, there's something I have to tell you about myself.
I know all I need to know.
No, I have to tell you. I have no choice. All I was sent to do was to make Xanadu happen.
I don't get it.
Sonny, you have to believe me when I tell you that I never wanted to hurt you. That was the last thing I wanted to happen. I'm not as I appear to you. Have you ever heard the expression kissed by a muse? That's what I am. I'm a muse.
I'm glad somebody's having a good time.
Oh, please don't make a joke. I'm serious. I come from Mount Helicon. I'm the daughter of Zeus.
So anyway, Mr. Beck and Mr. Kelly get together to open this nightclub come disco called Xanadu, and the noise you can hear in the wings is caused by Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Kubla Khan loudly insisting it's nothing to do with them. With the aid of Miss Newton-John, who appears to be portraying not so much eternal woman as eternal pop singer, the place is launched with an opening party that's strongly reminiscent of Top of the Pops on a bad night. Mr. Beck looks bemused from start to finish. Mr. Kelly, all avuncular benevolence, grins so remorselessly that his cheeks must have stretch marks, and Miss Newton-John's behaviour is explained, as we heard, by the fact that she's an Antipodean muse who's been sent to Earth by her father Zeus, or if you prefer, Zeus, for the sole purpose of getting this rotten discotheque off the ground. I can only assume that Zeus is in his dotage and should be certified immediately. Now, I expect it will be argued that Xanadu is designed explicitly for a young audience, and if I were a young audience, I would appreciate the musical numbers, but I'd also resent quite bitterly the assumption that I could easily be fobbed off with a ludicrous plot and lousy dialogue such as I hear on offer. I see absolutely no reason to believe that a young audience is not in possession of all its marbles. Anyway, here are Miss Newton-John and Mr. Kelly dancing. And Xanadu's now showing in London and goes on release next month. But right now, with musicals as a convenient peg, we come to the return of our weekly competition. I'm going to show you 3 clips featuring well-known dancing feet, and you have to tell me whose legs the feet are attached to and in what 3 films they were seen. Right then, whose feet were they, and what were the 3 films they were in? Answers by Friday, please, to Film 80, BBC Television Centre, London, W12 8QT. The winner will receive soundtrack LPs of Urban Cowboy, Can't Stop the Music, and Fame, and the runners-up will get our much-coveted T-shirts. Oh, and incidentally, in the past, we've had an awful lot of entrants writing to say that if they win, could they please have a T-shirt rather than the LPs or whatever? Well, this is most gratifying and shows profound good taste, but I ought to point out that the winner gets a T-shirt as well as the LPs or whatever. And on that note, we come more or less to the end of tonight's programme, except for a brief extract from our last film, Fame. This was made by Alan Parker, who also directed Bugsy Malone and Midnight Express, and it follows the adventures of a bunch of stage-struck teenagers at Manhattan's High School of the Performing Arts. It's great fun and provides a nicely upbeat note on which to leave you. I'll be back next Monday night at 10:50, so until then, goodbye.
Bruno Martelli, he wrote the music. Today, 46th Street, tomorrow, Madison Square Garden.
Papa!
Hey, Bruno!
What are you doing to me? You've lost your mind. You're crazy. Those tapes aren't ready. They're not supposed to be played.
Bruno, look at the people. They don't know it's not ready, Bruno. Look at it, they like it. Bruno, they like it. Bruno.